Hello, and welcome to another episode of Healing Art After Hours, where I upload videos of live Zoom creative workshops from my Healing Art Happy Hour meetups. I'm Shauna Robeson from Creating Space Coastal, and this is the fifth and final installment of a five-part watercolor foundations workshop. In this video, I will be discussing some basic artistic design elements that you can apply to your own watercolor art to enhance the aesthetic appeal of your projects. Handouts for this slide presentation are available for download at my shop at creatingspacecoastal.com. And as always, happy creating. Enjoy.
Okay, the next thing is design elements. We're getting close to our time here. I think I can get through all of these. So I'm just keeping an eye on time too. Okay, design and competition or composition. So this is thinking about, when you're about to do a painting project, what things you might want to consider in the design of it. Design elements include the lines, which can direct the viewer eyes through the page or divide up or create hierarchy within the page. The shape is the two-dimensional elements that create boundaries and emphasis between different subjects on the page. And then, of course, there's the space. There's the positive space, which is the element, the focal point, and then there's also the background. And sometimes you can emphasize or highlight things by how you use the space, the negative space in the background to really make the subject, the positive space, pop. So, it's important just to be aware of these different elements. The color can create moods, not only by the color itself, because different colors have a mood associated with it, but also its value or vibrancy. If they're more subdued, that can tell a different story than if they're really vibrant. And we'll talk a little bit about the story that we're telling in a minute and how to use those. Texture adds dimension and interest. So if everything's the same, there's no different texture, it just can be a little bit more bland if it's all just more one-dimensional. So all of these elements combined together, create the effect. And it just takes practice, and you start to learn what you're attracted to, what appeals to you. So here's an example. This is a photograph that I used, and if I was going to paint this, I might use this as my subject. And this has a variety of things. If I think about the lines, it doesn't have really geometrical lines. It has more organic curved lines. They're really soft. They don't really direct you any which way necessarily. The shape of it is very organic as opposed to, again, geometric. And I like to trace the outline. Now, in this case, this looks like a flower when I trace it, but sometimes we have in our mind what something looks like, or it's supposed to look like. And then if we outline the shape, it actually might look very different than what we picture it in our head, because we might be looking at it from a different angle than what we would normally be looking at it. So I suggest to trace the element that the focal point, especially if you're going to do any kind of drawing, to get an idea of what is the shape that you're working with, because it might surprise you what the shape actually looks like compared to what your brain tells you it looks like. And then in this case, this does have different texture. This is more smooth texture, and then this is a more mottled texture. So we have some contrast in texture, which makes it interesting. We have some good negative space here, some background that's darker. So we can really highlight this with some darker, background elements. And then this is, of course, the positive space here. Color, here's a list of different emotions related to these different colors. So if you're trying to, think of a piece that you want for a certain space, for example, if you want love, passion, and desire to be the topic of the day, you might want to include more reds, more romance. This also, as I had mentioned when I did this previously, in restaurants, they often use red because red encourages action and eating more. So they want you to eat more. So, but yeah, these different colors can elicit different emotions. So it's good to be just aware of that. And you'll find certain color schemes will appeal to you more than others. And eventually, playing around, you'll learn what appeals to you. One easy way to think about placement of items on your piece is to consider the composition, and the rule of thirds is a pretty easy one. There are several of them, and I have a link here. You can go dive deep into the golden ratio and what shapes and patterns tend to be found in nature and what tend to be appealing or aesthetic to the eyes. But this is a basic one that for beginners that, you know, is just easy. What we want to do as artists is draw attention to our artwork, and we want to keep the viewer's eyes on our page. We don't want them to move on to the next thing. We want to keep them intrigued and keep their eyes in the piece. So we want to put the key elements and these sweet spots where the intersections happen. So the rule of thirds is divide the page up horizontally by 3 equal parts and divide the page up vertically 3 equal parts. And then at these intersections is where you want to place something of interest, maybe some of your key elements of you know, your design. And this helps to create some visual harmony if you put things in these spots. So just being aware of how our brains work and why, you know, why that is appealing to you helps us to create things that are more appealing to others. Another, this is an example of just placing these over the top of some of the artwork that I talked about before. And oh, I have the moon here, you know, I have my horizon line following this area with some interesting, I got some interest, the little sticks there. So I didn't lay this out before I made this, but when I laid this over, I'm like, oh yeah, I did pull some of those key element designs in there intuitively. I didn't even know that I was doing it. But I'm finding that some of these key elements that I created here are landing on these points. So I'm like, okay, that's probably why it appeals to me. So just be aware of that when you're doing it. You can think of it ahead of time, or you can just say, oh, did I capture that? You'll probably find that if it appeals to you, it's probably following one of these design rules, because you're hitting the mark on that. There's also the rule of odds. When you're having a combination of items, you typically want to keep it odd versus even. Our natural tendency as humans is to pair things up, and once we pair things up, we are done. So if I'm looking at this image here, I'm like, okay, I got a pair of those and a pair of those. Okay, I'm done, I move on. Whereas if it's odd, we're still looking for the other one. So it keeps our eyes continuously looking rather than being done with our process. I had a really hard time with these even ones, even making it look real organic, because you know, I was trying to put them at different heights and make them look as interesting as possible, but they just never were as relaxing as this. I was able to just get it just appealed to me more. And no matter where I place these, I just wasn't getting a relaxed effect that I wanted to. So keep that in mind. And it doesn't have to be the same items. It could be for a bouquet of flowers or balloons or whatever, but it could also be, you know, if you do a still life and you're putting a vase and a flower and a ball or something together, you know, put 3 things, and that creates that artistic interest. All right, and then the next start is, you know, then we're telling the story of what we want. What you know, that's the other items and design element are trying to create that aesthetics that it tends to be appealing to the mind. But what is the story that we're trying to convey? And by using these elements, we can also help tell the story. We want to tell enough of the story, but maybe not too much of the story. One way to do that is through light and shadow. So when we use light and shadow, like, the first thing we want to think about is, where is the light source coming from? In this case, it's kind of hard to tell, because we have, you know, we have bright spots over here and bright spots over there. So it might be just face fronting. But if we want to really use the light and shadow effect, we want to think about, when we're doing our piece, we want to be consistent with where the light source is coming from. So if we say the light source is coming from over here, then we want to make sure that shadows kind of run behind the items that are blocking that light source. So being consistent with that. The light also tells us relational positioning. So if there's shadow here that's based on this, we know this is above it and it's blocking the light. The light is coming this way and it's blocking that light. So it tells us that this is below this, you know, depth wise, and it's behind this, and then the light source is coming from there. So each of these things are a clue to what's happening in this picture. And we can create that, we can make it whatever we want. So again, that tells the depth and distance because it says this is behind, this is back behind this. And if I have a shadow, if this is a shadow behind this, this is on top of this. So it tells that this is closer to the viewer than this is, and it's creating the shadow. So light and shadow can really be a helpful way to just give it or some organic and some natural and some realistic looks to it. The other thing to think about with light and shadow, it gives us contrast, contrast and visual interest. And it also, if you'll notice here, it changes the color. So this flower is all one color in real life. Like if we were to look at it in real life, we could, we would say, oh, it's one color. But when we look at how the light impacts it, here it looks a little orange or even maybe yellow on these edges. And then here it looks like a deeper, more scarlet red versus this orange here. So when we do this mixing, and this is what I was talking about earlier, that you do want to learn to mix, you do want to play around with your different colors, because this is how you get this realistic, more organic look to it, is by mixing up those reds. Maybe you add a little more yellow to the red to get this, shade. You're going to use more water to get a lighter shade. You're going to add a little yellow to get that. And then you're going to, use a darker shade to make this dark contrast. This looks a little rosier, looks a little bluer. So maybe I add a little blue to that red mix to get that color. So this is where you can really play with creating some interest, some contrast, some realism, or it doesn't even have to be realistic. It just has to create interest. And this is how you do it, by these mixes, by not just using one value of one color to create this whole flat flower. That's going to look pretty flat. And you can do that, but if you want to ramp it up, then you start playing with layering different shades of that and different colors and hues of that red. So that's how you can use mixing to do that. I, as I said, like to use the black and white just to really see the contrast of that. Now I can really see where the lightest lights are, where the darkest darks are. So when I'm planning this, I can, have an idea. And of course, this is a photograph, and my painting can be completely different. I don't have to tell this exactly the way it is. I have creative license to add or delete any elements of this piece that I want in my actual artwork. So that's the fun of it too. The focus is another way to tell part of the story. It tells you that this is closer to you, to the viewer. And then as you recede into this blurriness, that's further away. It's not as important. That's not the important part of the story. This is the important part of the story. Now, in this case, there's some flowers over here on the edge, and this is a very vibrant color. So artistically, what I would probably do is either subdue this color to where it's lost its vibrancy, so it looks like it's in the distance, or it loses its importance by reducing the vibrancy of it, because we don't want to draw the attention of the viewers off the page. So this is where creative license comes into change. What are we seeing here as this is our representation, but we're creating it on the page as an art form, and we can decide to delete that completely or subdue it or change it. So this is the focal point. Making these a little less in focus in our painting is going to give it a little bit more realistic effect, make it more subdued in the background, less important, and then highlight the importance of these items. So you don't have to get every single detail in. It's easy to want to make, oh, I've got this detail here, and there's these details, but this is the focal point. We don't have to tell the whole story. We just have to tell enough of the story. So it's okay to not show every single line here and just make this a little bit of a blurry, loose figure in the background. That's going to just bring more attention to this rather than drawing attention away to these details that, yes, we can see in this photograph, but we don't have to show it in the art. Hopefully that makes sense. So a focus, tells us also, where is it in relationship to us? This is going to be closer than these things. The further back we go, the more subdued the colors, the more soft the lines are, the more, the more it loses its focus, its focal point. Okay, speaking of that perspective, one way to try to get a realistic perspective is to start with your horizon line, create a point on the horizon line, and then you can draw from that point. Doesn't matter where that point is, it could be over here even, but just when you're going to draw it to the first subject. If these were all the same size person, these were all 6 feet, tall people, this is what they would look like as they moved into the distance. So the further along this road, let's say this is a road here, the further along that they move along the side of that road, the smaller they're going to appear. And this is a way to just be consistent with that, is you can draw like a pencil line to the top and the bottom of the first one, and then you just fit all of these items at various distances. You just can add them at that height. And this is how you would do a fence, for example. If you're trying to make fence posts all the, make sense, you would do the first fence post and then smaller, 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 following the edge of this plane, assuming they're all on the same level, right? It's not a mountain. This is just a flat road that goes out into the distance. So that's one way to create a realistic perspective as far as distance goes. And depending on where the horizon line is in relationship, you just keep the relationship the same. This horizon line is always going to be at the knees for this particular one. It's always going to be at the chest. In this case, it's always going to be at the head. And then you're going to follow this line all the way to the horizon line. So that's just one way to help you do some realistic perspectives. All right, so keys to success: practice, practice, practice. Practice makes progress. I don't say practice makes perfect, because perfection is not real, but progress is. And it's all about practicing. It's about muscle memory. It's about the knowledge. This is hopefully the knowledge piece of it that's going to help you, but really it's going to be about the muscle memory. It's about learning your materials, your paper, your brushes, your paint, being patient with yourself, letting yourself play and enjoy all the levels of the process, not letting yourself get too frustrated if it's not doing what you want, because just keep practicing and you'll start to get closer to what you want. So be patient with yourself, be positive with yourself, be that good mentor that, think of yourself as that child that comes to you with their art project that they did in kindergarten and shows it to you, and you go, oh my gosh, that's the most beautiful picture I've ever seen. Well, that's the mentor you want to be to yourself, because you want to be encouraging that you even did it, and you want to say the positive words to yourself to let yourself continue to play and get better, and know that someday you're going to look back and go, wow, this is where I began, but look what I'm doing now. So stay positive, be your biggest fan, your biggest mentor. I know that's hard. Learn. That's what we're trying to do here: the foundations, the brush techniques, the color mixing. Learn all of these things. And then the quality of the materials does matter, but start at your level and move towards that, and just be aware of that, to the point where you don't get too frustrated by the limitations of those materials that you might be using. And then you start doing fun stuff like, painting.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of Healing Art After Hours. You can download materials related to this topic, including PDF notes of PowerPoint presentations, at creatingspacecoastal.com. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you found this content helpful, and join me for the next video here at my Creating Space Coastal channel, where I hope to inspire you to create space in your life for fun. Thank you.